No, I'd rather not. Testing. Oh, yeah. Sounds like, you hear me? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for another VERITAS lecture. Our guest speaker tonight is Professor Joel Otto from Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary. He is a church history teacher up there. He just told me he's also on the education board, but he doesn't really teach anything there for education-wise. So church history, his guru tonight. He's going to talk to us about the history of the Wisconsin Synod. We're celebrating 175 years of our Synod this year. He's got a lot of history in his own family. His grandpa was professor and president of the seminary. That's right before I got there, I think it is.
Yeah, Armin Schutze.
Yeah, Armin Schutze. His dad was a classmate of my dad's, so served in Council Bluffs, Iowa, Milwaukee, Saginaw, where else?
That was it.
That's it.
Then
okay.
Retired.
So, yeah.
Sturgeon Bay now.
We'll give Professor Otto just about 45, 50 minutes to talk, and we'll take, if you have questions during that time, or do you just want to breeze through?
Yeah, I can take questions as we go along. I'll hopefully be able to get through all my material, but we try.
Okay, yeah. We'll take maybe 5, 7 minutes at the end if you have questions or comments. Professor Joel Otto.
Thank you, Pastor Bodie. He was also 2 years behind me in class, in school, and he was in my brother's class. So my brother Tim. So Tim Otto, Tim Bodie, they're classmates. So it's a privilege to be here with you tonight. Also a privilege to serve as the chairman of the WELS 175th Anniversary Committee. I was also presenter at the Synod Convention this summer. So it's just kind of in my wheelhouse here now. So I thought I'd talk about tonight one of the questions that sometimes people will ask: how did we end up with the ministerial education schools where they're at? You know, why do we have a school in Saginaw, Michigan, and in New Ulm, Minnesota, and Watertown, and how did the seminary end up in Mequon? Well, the answer to those questions always is history, so that's what you're going to get tonight, a little history. The beginnings of them and some of the development of those schools. We'll see how far we get. We'll get as far as we get, I guess, in 45 to 50 minutes. So the question goes right back to the very beginning of our Synod's history. One of the biggest challenges our Synod had in its early years was just not enough pastors. This chart illustrates a little bit the issue. You notice, by 1860, you've got 20 pastors and 59 churches. That's not a really great ratio. And the challenge they had was figuring out where are we going to get pastors from. We're this fledgling little Wisconsin Synod, growing slowly since our beginnings in 1850, and they had some options. One option was German mission societies. That's where a number of the early Wisconsin Synod pastors came from. These mission societies, this is one of them, Barmen, they trained men to go to places like India or Africa, or now to North America and the United States, where all these German immigrants are flooding in. One of the challenges with those mission societies was inconsistent training, inconsistent numbers, and they weren't always as Lutheran as one would have liked. Those mission societies were more like, if you're Lutheran, if you're Reformed, either one is fine. In fact, we'd kind of like you to serve both. So you had that kind of a mindset coming out of these German mission houses. Another option was, we'll assign a guy who has some gifts, has some interest in being a pastor. We'll assign him to a mentor, another pastor who can provide him with training. Well, that's got its own share of problems. Again, inconsistent training kind of depends on what the pastor's like. How much time does he have to train another guy with dealing with often multiple congregations. And is each pastor going to have the gifts needed to provide the kind of training you want? A third option, well, there are some other Lutheran seminaries already operating in America. What about one of those? And in fact, one guy from the Wisconsin Synod, this guy, John Henry Seeker, the one and only Wisconsin, in fact, I would say he's the first homegrown Wisconsin Synod pastor, the first guy who grew up in the Wisconsin Synod and then went to be a pastor. He was the only guy that we sent to the seminary in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. He went there in the late 1850s, graduated in 1861. Challenge with that, few problems. One is Gettysburg wasn't real, their focus wasn't really on German, and we needed German-speaking pastors. Secondly, from a doctrine standpoint, the Eastern Lutheran church bodies, particularly the one that was operating the Gettysburg Seminary, a little questionable on their commitment to being true Lutherans. Third problem, if you send a guy from the frontier lands of Wisconsin to Pennsylvania to the east, is he really going to want to come back to Wisconsin? Legitimate questions. There were also some seminaries operated by the Missouri Synod, but our forefathers in the 1850s and early 1860s were a little leery of the overly, what they felt was the too strict Lutheranism of the Missouri Synod. So they didn't see those as an option. We'll see that mindset changes a little bit later. So this is the challenge you have. Where are we going to get our pastors from? In 1860, so we're going to get to the point where we're going to start our own seminary here, establishing a seminary and college. Now, I should have mentioned, was the handout made available? There is an outline. Okay, so everybody has it. So we'll kind of be following that along as we go along here. So establishing a seminary and college. The guy who's responsible for this is Johannes Badin. When he becomes president in 1860, he's the first president, John Muehlhäuser, stepped down. He was so busy at Grace Church, plus he was getting a little older, and so Badin gets elected as the new president. Badin, shortly after, right before he got elected president, had taken a call to St. Mark's in Watertown. Badin puts on the top of the agenda of the synod, we need to start a seminary. In fact, for 3 straight synod conventions, he keeps bringing it up. First time, 1861, the synod convention says, yeah, that sounds really expensive, Civil War, kind of starting, maybe this isn't the right time, let's entrust our guys to the friendship of the Eastern Lutheran church bodies. Brings it up again in 1862, gets more passionate. In fact, I love this quote, "We must dig a well in our country and our synod that will supply the workers, where we can get a consistent supply of consistently trained workers. We need to do this ourselves. It's something we have to do." And it seems that in the ensuing year, he worked on the pastors and in the congregations of the synod, because in 1863, now the synod was willing to say, yes, we need to do this. Question then came, where's it going to be? Milwaukee, where Muehlhäuser was still the pastor in Grace in Milwaukee, there we go, or will it be in Watertown? Now, the argument between the two, the guys in Milwaukee were saying, well, the culture of a big city, that'll be good for the boys. They'll get to hear better preaching at the bigger churches in Milwaukee, and I can't imagine Badin liked to hear that, because he was at Watertown. The Watertown argument, the big cities have a lot more temptations for young men, like places of ill repute, or bars, taverns. Of course, you've ever been to Watertown now, they might have 1 or 2 taverns there. But those are some of the arguments. Plus, the folks in Watertown kind of said, especially the farmers in the area, we will provide some funding. Well, when the vote was taken, Watertown won by like 43-17 or something like that. So it was pretty down, and it always helps this is going to be a theme. It always helps when the synod president is located there. That carries some weight. And so in 1863, the seminary will get started. Now, this is that map of kind of bird's eye view of Watertown. And the first building, we'll point it out in just a minute, is right up in that corner there. Did my circle go? Come on here. All right. There we go. Right up in that corner there is the northwest, is the first building. But that was built in 65. 63, they're going to be there. Back away. They're going to be in a rented house in 1863. The question also was, who's going to teach? Well, by God's grace, one of the mission societies had provided as the traveling preacher, the Reiseprediger, who's kind of traveling around the state, finding different groups of people to gather, immigrants to gather into congregations. This guy traveled as far north as Wausau. He was university trained. He had his doctorate in theology. Perfect guy to do this. So he becomes the first professor and president of our seminary in 1863. He had one student who dropped out after a few months because Professor Moldenke there didn't think he had the academic chops. But thankfully another student came a few weeks later, and then a few more, and then they all suddenly realized, okay, we need a feeder system of some kind. We need a feeder school. And so almost right away they made plans to start a college right away too. And in fact, they dispatched Badin to Europe, to Germany, and he went as far as St. Petersburg, Russia, raising funds for this building. There's a plaque there talking about it. This building right here, that's the first building of Northwestern College and the founding of Northwestern College. So you had the college, so then the seminary moved here too. So you have kind of a prep school, college, seminary, all in one building. This was nicknamed the Kaffeemühle, or coffee mill, because it looks kind of like a coffee grinder with the cupola on top. So this was the first building. The college had a little bit of an identity crisis in its initial years. The first president of the college, I should also mention this. This was the first issue of the Wisconsin Synod's original periodical called the Gemeindeblatt, literally church paper. This coincided with the dedication of that building at Watertown. Originally, Northwestern was called Northwestern University because the first president, Adam Martin, had dreams of making this new school in Watertown into an American-style institution. Kind of his dreams were this would be the Harvard of the West. He had been trained and came out of Lutheran church in the East, so that makes some sense that he'd want that. But that isn't what the Wisconsin Synod needed. And about this same time, as we get into the late 1860s, the Wisconsin Synod is making a shift in its doctrinal position, where it's closer to the Missouri Synod and the more stricter Lutheranism than the kind of wishy-washy Lutheranism of the East. And so Adam Martin will actually leave the Synod in 1868 and go back east. 1866 saw the arrival of the calling of a second man as a theology professor at the seminary, a man named Adolf Heinecke. Another gift to our Synod. University trained back in Germany, University of Halle. Even better, the guy knew Lutheran theology, appreciated the Lutheran confessions, the Lutheran theologians of the 17th century. He was just encyclopedic knowledge of that, and a gifted preacher and a gifted teacher. So he starts teaching in 1866. So that's kind of the value, and he ends up becoming the theologian of the Synod for the first 50 plus years. He is the key theologian of our Synod. As we move close, in 1868, we develop a relationship with the Missouri Synod. We get in fellowship with them. And part of expressing that fellowship was kind of deciding, let's be more efficient in our worker training. And so the proposal was the Wisconsin Synod will cease its seminary training and send all of its students for seminary to St. Louis. So Concordia St. Louis, is where we sent our students for 8 years. In turn, the Missouri Synod would provide students for Northwestern, plus a professor. We were supposed to provide a professor to St. Louis. Haneke was called to St. Louis twice, returned it both times. Part of the reason is by the second time, he was pastor at St. Matthew's in Milwaukee. And I think he just didn't want to go to St. Louis. He's a Brewer fan instead of a Cardinal fan, I don't know. But for 8 years, our synods had our pastors being trained at Concordia, which was actually a blessing because several of the guys who get trained there will be key theologians in the Wisconsin Synod in future generations. The 4 men shown there, the top left is August Pieper. Next to him on the right is Reinhold Pieper. The bottom left one is Franz Pieper. Yes, they're all brothers, all from a lay family. The mother came over after her husband died. She moved to Watertown, sent her boys to Northwestern, and then they went to Concordia. August Pieper will serve in almost 40 years as seminary professor in the Wisconsin Synod, and for a while also as president. Reinhold Pieper will spend a couple of decades after serving in Wisconsin Synod churches. He'll end up as a professor and eventually president of the Concordia Seminary in Springfield. Franz Pieper, on the bottom left, will end up as longtime professor, president, and even president of the Missouri Synod in St. Louis. Three brothers all end up being presidents of confessional Lutheran seminaries in America. Just kind of an astounding family. The Jeske family today traces their roots back to August Pieper, interestingly enough. The guy on the bottom right is J.P. Kaler. His father had been a key pastor in the Wisconsin Synod to move us into a more confessional direction. So J.P. Kaler also went there. He served as our Wisconsin Synod seminary professor and even president for a while as well. So all these guys are getting trained at Concordia, being taught by C.F.W. Walther, who is the kind of the American Luther in a way, especially in the Missouri Synod. So those were blessings to our church body. But in 1878, we decided to bring our seminary training back to Wisconsin. We were worried also, again, kind of if they go off to St. Louis, are they going to want to come back to the little Wisconsin Synod into the frontier areas here? So we brought our seminary back in 1878. At Northwestern, when we lost Adam Martin, but we gained the guy who's sitting front and center, a guy named August Ernst. Ernst will become the president of Northwestern in 1871. And for the next 116 years, these 3 men, come on here. There we go. Those 3 men will be presidents of Northwestern. August Ernst served from 1871 to 1919. E.E. Kowalski, the middle one, served for the next 40 years. And Carlton Toppy, the one on the right, served from 59 to 87. That is unbelievable leadership consistency, and it served our synod well. It provided an identity for our Northwestern school to become this school for training pastors who will then or training men who will then go on to the seminary, kind of developing it as a single purpose school. Meanwhile, in some of our neighboring states, Minnesota and Michigan, those 2 synods, there was a Michigan Synod and a Minnesota Synod. The Michigan Synod, Friedrich Schmid, had already been working in the state of Michigan. Well, it wasn't even, I don't even know if it was a state yet in 1833. He started working there in 1833 already and was gathering groups. And in fact, the oldest Lutheran church in Michigan dates to 1833, founded by this guy, Friedrich Schmid, Salem, in CO Township, rural, kind of on the outskirts of Ann Arbor. It is to this day still a WELS congregation. In 1860, he gets the Michigan Synod organized. This guy, there we go. This guy, Johann Christian Friedrich Heyer, also often affectionately known as Father Heyer, he's a fascinating guy. He started a number of churches back in the 1830s in western Pennsylvania. Then he was called to be the first Lutheran missionary to go from America to an overseas place. He went to India and spent at least a dozen years in India, and then comes back, and the Pennsylvania Synod calls him to go to the Twin Cities and start some churches there. And he eventually does, and starts in 1860 the Minnesota Synod. So now you have a Michigan Synod, Wisconsin Synod, Minnesota Synod. Over time, these synods end up, as we'll see, getting together or kind of drawing closer to each other, particularly initially Wisconsin and Minnesota. But both of those synods had kind of similar histories as the Wisconsin Synod, struggling first to figure out what's our theology, or how Lutheran are we going to be. Eventually they start gravitating more toward a more confessional or I guess I hate to use the word strict, but a more confessional Lutheranism, where we take seriously the Lutheran confessions and the distinctions between Lutheran and Reformed. So both, though, also struggled with, we don't have enough pastors. Where are we going to get them from? And so the Minnesota Synod starts talking about, in the early 1880s, about starting its own school. By that time, the president was a guy named C.J. Albrecht. And he was the new president of the Minnesota Synod and also the new president at St. Paul's in New Ulm. And he puts on the agenda, we got to start a school. And in 1883, the Synod decided, yes, we'll start a school. There was a debate, where are we going to have it? New Ulm or St. Paul, Minnesota, or someplace in the Twin Cities. The New Ulm, they voted on New Ulm because New Ulm promised some money, and Albrecht was pastor in New Ulm. But they said, let's wait one more year and make a final decision in 1884. Well, the 1884 convention was held in New Ulm, and when all the convention delegates got there, lo and behold, a building was already going up. So the folks in New Ulm were so excited to have a church, to have a school there, that they jumped the gun a little bit, and so they start building a building up there on the hill. There's downtown New Ulm for you. There, I love this picture. You can see the New Ulm building, Old Main, up on the left, up on the hill. If you look way to the right, on the right edge of the picture, on the top of the hill, that's the Herman the German statue. That if you've ever been to New Ulm, it's still there today, across from our MLC campus. So this was the beginning of what was known as Dr. Martin Luther College, which for the Minnesota Synod served as high school, college, seminary. Kind of the whole works in one institution. So that's 1884. Over in Michigan, they were having similar conversations a few years later, and they had different leadership by then. They had these two men, the one on the left, or the one on the right, Stefan Klingman, who was president for a while. Then he was replaced by the guy on the left, Christian Eberhardt. And Eberhardt is pastor in St. Paul's in Saginaw. And again, we need to have a school, we need to have a seminary. And initially they started it in this building right there, a house that a member had in Manchester, Michigan, had offered to use for the seminary to get it started, but they need a permanent building. And again, the debate, should it be in Saginaw, should it be in the Detroit area? Well, Eberhardt offered land, donated the land. And so in 1887, you have the Michigan School getting started and built. So they're Old Main there, Michigan Lutheran Seminary. In 1892, we have the Synod, the Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin synods, which are drawing closer to each other. They have similar interests, similar, again, histories kind of, and they're neighbors, and they start saying, we should do some stuff together. So in 1892, they formed a federation. They called it the Joint Evangelical Lutheran Synod of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and other states. Did not provide a nice acronym like we have today. It's a mouthful. What they decided to do, they each retain their independence, but they said we're going to work together in several ways. One thing we're going to do together heathen missions. That turned into the Apache mission, which started in 1893. Another thing they said we're going to do is work together in publishing. We're going to share the Gemeindeblatt. We're going to publish stuff together. And the Synod had just started Northwestern Publishing House. So that's the second thing. And then the third area, let's do this worker training thing more efficiently. So here was the plan. The Watertown School would become and kind of be what it was already, the pastor training college, but also had a prep school or high school attached to it. So you got the high school college thing, but that's going to be where we send the guys who are going to be pastors. The New Ulm School, Dr. Martin Luther College, is going to become the normal school, as they would call it, the teacher training school. And it also had a prep school as part of it. The Michigan School, we're going to say, okay, you guys stop your seminary training and just be a high school. So we've got the Michigan School there is going to be the high school. And then what we're going to do is we're going to build a brand new seminary in Wauwatosa. After the initial meeting of the Federation, they all went out to 60th and Lloyd in Wauwatosa for the cornerstone lane. That cornerstone there is still embedded in the bricks underneath the tower at our seminary today. And they constructed this seminary in Wauwatosa and opened in 1893. This would serve as the Wisconsin Synod Seminary for the next 36 or so years. No, that's not right. Yeah, 36 years. So that's where we're going to have the seminary now. Sounds like it's a great plan. And sounds kind of familiar, right? Maybe? We got a school in Watertown. We got a school in New Ulm. We got a school in Saginaw. We got a seminary in the Milwaukee area. Already back in 1892. There was a tragedy struck, however, in 1894, a year later, when the coffee here, a few more pictures of the Wauwatosa. Here are some guys studying. Here's some guys kind of just hanging out. There we go, having fun, smoking pipes, doing whatever as students will do, posing for pictures, that sort of thing. 1894 in the summer, tragedy struck at Northwestern. Lightning struck the coffee mula and a fire gutted it. The only time they ran a special edition of the Gemeindeblatt to let the Synod know what happened and to appeal for financial help. There were concerns that the seminary could fall apart or that the college could fall apart. Maybe the Synod could fall apart because of this. But God's people in the Synod responded, and by the following spring, a new building was constructed at Northwestern, that building right there, which was, of course, being that it was built in 1894 or 5 rather than 1865, was an improvement. Better constructed, better laid out, and that sort of thing. Over in Michigan, best laid plans don't always work well. The folks in Michigan, they kind of liked their seminary. And they really didn't, they had second thoughts about this whole thing, about giving it up. This is one of the seminary classes. You can see Aberhart is sitting front and center there. The students are aligned in the back. The other two guys are other professors. Their seminary was churning out guys. They were getting a supply of pastors. They were worried if we send them over to Wisconsin, are they going to want to come back to Michigan? Legitimate question. I hope is anybody here from Michigan? I wish Pastor Bordelin was here because I could make fun of him. We have some Michigan. I'm sorry. My parents lived in Saginaw for 20-some years, so I should be nice to Michigan. But so they kind of dragged their feet with closing the seminary part, and it eventually led to a split in the Synod. Because some of the pastors said, come on, we made this agreement, we need to follow through on it. The others were saying, no, we want to keep our seminary open, and we don't care what agreements were made. It got so bad that there was literally a split. The Michigan Synod left the Federation, but a portion of them broke away and stayed in the Federation. It was a mess. And the seminary, meanwhile, dwindled in numbers. In, I think it was 1904 or 1905, both groups, independently of each other, published in their different publications apologies. And then they got together at a meeting in Bay City and hugged it out. They each repented of things that they had said and done and offered mutual forgiveness and kind of said, we need to fix this. We need to get back together. And they did. They closed the seminary in 1907, and then in 1910 reopened it as the prep school that it always was supposed to be. There we go. There's Otto J.R. Haneke, who was called to be the president of MLS, Michigan Lutheran Seminary, and served in that capacity for 40 years. Michigan Lutheran Seminary became the prep school. Now, one of the, I suppose you could say, the olive branch that the Federation offered to the folks in Michigan was this: we'll let you keep the seminary name. And so that's why, to this day, we have the confusion that we have two institutions in our synod that both have the name seminary. Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary in Mequon, Michigan Lutheran Seminary in Saginaw. And every once in a while, WELS folks will hear about Michigan Lutheran Seminary and say, what? I thought our seminary was Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary. What's going on here? And then you'll get to explain to them that this is actually a prep school, a boarding high school. And so that's why, there's your explanation for why Michigan Lutheran Seminary has the name seminary. It goes way back to the 1880s, 1890s. Yes, please.
Up to this point, is the predominant language German? I mean, is this all German and they're only really reaching out to German people?
Almost exclusively, all the education at these schools is being done in German. And almost all of the ministry in our congregations is being done in German. That will continue, that will start to change around 19 teens, maybe in some places a little bit before that, but it accelerates after World War I and during World War I because of the whole issue with obviously with the Germans and the German fears and all that during World War I, plus the recognition we're not getting as many immigrants over here anymore, and so we need to switch to English. But it takes a while. You're still, even into the 30s, a lot of the teaching, at least at the seminary level, was still being done in German, and even some in Latin. Part of it was because a lot of the materials were in that language. It took a while for us to kind of catch up and get materials into English, educational materials. But you will have some English training. For example, there was a pastor in the Milwaukee area, a guy named Reinhold Adelberg, who was an adjunct professor at the seminary and gave the guys some English language training, just so that they could operate in English, because they knew they were going to have to eventually. I will say this: I admire our Wisconsin Synod pastors who served congregations in the 19-teens, 20s, and even into the 30s, because almost all of them carried out a bilingual ministry, where they had services in both English and German almost every Sunday. My brother does that with Spanish in the Twin Cities, and I don't know how he does it. That just blows my mind that you would have to, you'd almost every Sunday you'd be writing your sermon in one language and preaching it in both. That's not easy, but these guys did it. And yeah, kind of my heroes in some ways for being able to do that. All right, so this is what we're looking at. Where am I at in my notes? The early 1900s will also see some changes, some building projects going on. In New Ulm, they build a music hall, which is still in use today. They also construct in 1928, the big classroom auditorium. At that time it was a gymnasium. That whole, if you've been, if any of those who've gone to New Ulm or been there, it's that big, I think they call it today the winter. It's a big section of the Wittenberg Collegiate Center. So there's some big building projects at New Ulm. So this is what, as you're going into the 30s, this is what the aerial view of the campus looks like. All of those buildings are still used today, I believe, with maybe the exception of a couple small ones. But the main buildings are still used today as dorms or music room or music, or the big classroom. An old Main is still there too. They just kind of linked them all together now, a number of them together. At Northwestern, in 1912, they built a gymnasium. This was an interesting building project because it was led by it was paid for by a number of Milwaukee businessmen who were alumni of Northwestern. Northwestern at one point, prior to the 20s or so, had a business track besides the pastor training track. So a number of men had gone there and then gone on to be businessmen. In addition, another big donor was a German immigrant who had come over in the early days of the Synods history and had been the Synods publisher, a guy named George Brumder. This guy knew presidents. He was probably the most prolific German language publisher in America of German newspapers, and he published the first Wisconsin Synod hymnal, things like that. And so they got this built in 1912, and when it was dedicated, on the day of dedication, August Ernst, the president of Northwestern, received a telegram from President William Howard Taft congratulating Northwestern on the construction of this new facility. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty cool. You know, I mean, the President of the United States knew about us. I mean, he didn't quite have all the information accurate in his telegram, but he evidently knew probably through Brumder, I would imagine. Brumder knew him and Brumder knew Teddy Roosevelt. So it's probably through those connections that he knew about this. So that building on that auditorium or gymnasium is now the auditorium at Luther Prep School. It is the oldest building still on the campus. So this is what the college looked like as you're entering the 1930s. So the only building that's still there is the gymnasium, which is kind of top center, is the one that's still there today. What developments do we see in the later 20th century then in our ministerial education system? Development number one came about the same time they were constructing that building in New Ulm. There had been a committee that was appointed by the Synod to review kind of the education and ministerial education of the Synod. And the biggest takeaway from that report was the desire to have prep schools scattered throughout the Synod, like in every conference even. It's kind of what kind of came out of that eventually was all the area Lutheran high schools we had, because the proposal was that the churches in that conference should support that school, kind of what becomes of the area Lutheran high schools. The more immediate thing, though, that came out of this was the founding of a new prep school, Northwestern Lutheran Academy, in Mobridge, South Dakota. How many of you know that we had a prep school in Mobridge, South Dakota? How many of you, anybody here attend Northwestern Lutheran Academy? That's a tougher one for people in Wisconsin. If I asked that question in the Dakota-Montana district, there'd be a bunch of hands that would go up. But it was established there in Mobridge, and let's see here. Got to aim my clicker right. There we go. That was one of the original buildings that was called the White Building. Over time, they added others. There we go, another classroom building. I think that was built in the 50s. And so eventually their campus looked like that, looked like this from the air. There we go. So Mobridge, it had about, it topped out probably at 120, 130 students. And so now you've added, really what you have now is prep school in Saginaw, Watertown, New Ulm, and now Mobridge. So 4 prep schools is what you have starting in the 1920s. The other thing in the 20s, so the Wauwatosa Seminary was starting to get too small. It was also outdated already by the 19-teens. Electricity and things like that have caught up. Plus, it was not laid out the best. It seems that the dorm rooms, the sleeping rooms, quarters were on the top floor. The bathrooms and showers were in the basement. A little awkward. They also couldn't add any more books to the library because they were worried about compromising the integrity of the building, especially the floor. So the Synod started looking for new options. This property, there was concerns about what kind of ownership we had of the property, so that they decided, adding on there, it was probably not good. Plus, it wasn't a very big piece of property. So they started looking. They bought a piece of property in Wauwatosa. Land prices skyrocketed. We felt it was too expensive to build there, and so we sold it and we made a profit. Not often in our Synod's history did we make good on a land deal. Looked at a place out on a farm out in Economowalk, but that fell through. Eventually, the leaders of the synod who were tasked with this found this farm in Thiensville, 80 acres. They said, this is the place to do it. It was owned by some Missouri Synod folks who were members at Trinity and Freistadt. They weren't looking to sell, but when they found out what our synod wanted to do with the property, they said, we'll sell it to you. And they sold it to us for $25,000, which if you know Mequon land prices today, we got a bargain. It was deemed a really nice place. First of all, they wanted a place that was, God's creation, nature, that would be a good place to study, but also there was an interurban train line that had a stop right at the bottom of the hill in the village of Thiensville, perfect for access to the city, to Milwaukee, which would be good for the seminary students as well. So they had conceptual drawings here and sketches of what this might look like. The Wartburg Castle in Germany was sort of the inspiration with the big tower and things like that. And so they had different drawings that J.P. Kaler had worked up. Didn't turn out exactly like that. They ended up getting a pretty renowned architect from the Milwaukee area who they contracted to do this. So there was his sketch of it. And you can see here's the cornerstone lane. It seemed that it was raining that day when they laid the cornerstone. I like this picture so that you can see in the back center up top, that's the spiral staircase that was kind of built first. Everything's built around it then. That staircase goes up to my office, empties out at my office upstairs at the seminary. I also like this picture, the next one here. There we go. Whoops, let's go back one. I love the kid there on the right. I don't know I don't know who he was related to that he got a good seat like that, but the man with the book was the president of the seminary of the synod, Gustav Bergerman. And then here's more construction pictures. There we go. The architect checking things out, and the dedication, August 1929. Thankfully, it was all paid for. But you know what happened 2 months later, right? Stock market crash. Thankfully, it was paid for. They estimate 15,000 people gathered for the services and the dedication. They canceled church. They urged the Milwaukee churches to cancel services that Sunday morning, so all their members would go out to Mequon or the Thiensville or to the seminary for this. The building company provided all the planks and things for the benches. They had a rudimentary, old-fashioned sound system set up. They had choirs. It was just a glorious, probably the largest Wisconsin Synod gathering ever was at the dedication of this. That was how big a deal this was for our Synod to get this beautiful seminary that many would say is the most beautiful seminary in America. I'm biased, so I would agree, but you can see the folks there, and looking at it from that angle. They built 4 houses right away, professors' homes, which are still used today. One of them is going through a couple of them are going through some renovation finally of the kitchen and bathrooms and such. But and so we have our seminary. So there it is from up top. You notice how many of you have been to the seminary before in Mequon? One thing you notice what's missing from these pictures? That trees, yeah. You go there now and we got all these trees. That one's a farm. Not many trees there at the time. So that's a big deal of the seminary. Beginning in the 1950s, so 30s and 40s, obviously you can't do any building. You have clearly problems with money, depression, war, can't get the materials. But beginning in 1950 and extending for the next, I would say about 35 years, there is an absolute building boom on our Synod schools. Watertown gets almost completely rebuilt in about 25 years. They build a chapel arts building. The chapel was constructed thanks to a donation, about $100,000 from a WELS woman in Manitowoc, made the chapel possible. It wasn't part of the original plans initially. In the 70s, or 60s, they built another dormitory. There we go, another dorm. And then the gymnasium in the early 70s. And so today, or in the 1980s, so we went from the campus looking like that to looking like that. The only building still the same is the auditorium. everything else was since 1950. And all those buildings are still there and used by Luther Prep today. In New Ulm, also, or MLS, a similar building. I just love this picture because it caught the destruction of the old main at MLS just at the right spot. The camera was perfect. But that came down and they built new dorms, eventually a new gym at MLS. The New Ulm campus saw extensive building, went from a campus that looked like that to looking like that. So new dorms, new gym, new cafeteria, new library. This is the construction of the gymnasium, cafeteria, student union area that's still again there today. They converted the old gym to the auditorium, which is that right there. And so, just extensive building, the investments that our people put into, our forefathers put into our campuses in this era is just astounding. We're trying to raise money right now to build a new music center at Prep and to build a new education center or education wing at the seminary. They were doing that 10 times 5, it seems like, over the course of these 25, 30 years in our synod at various campuses. Even at the seminary, they added a dormitory wing at the 100th anniversary of the seminary, as well as a library in '68. And then finally, the auditorium was constructed in 1985. The gymnasium auditorium, if you've ever gone to Call Day or a Christmas concert, that's held there. In the 50s, the schools of our synod were exploding and DMLC wasn't keeping up. And so from 1960 to 1970, our synod operated a junior college in Milwaukee, Milwaukee Lutheran Teachers College. How many of you know that place existed? Anybody here attend there? All right. My mother did too. Barb Schutze attended there for 2 years. And the idea was you go there for 2 years and then you finish up at New Ulm. This is Robert Voss and Siegbert Becker looking at plans. They actually owned land out in Brookfield and they had plans, but then the synod decided, but actually what the Milwaukee Lutheran Teachers College did was buy time for New Ulm to build. And they decided to invest in New Ulm rather than build in the Milwaukee area. When this closed in 1970, some people still wanted a school in Milwaukee, a college, and it eventually led to the founding of Wisconsin Lutheran College in 1973, which obviously had a different purpose, but still, it kind of, there's some connections there a little bit. 2 amalgamations occur in the late 1970s. There's concerns about money, and Mobridge needs more buildings. Do we build in Mobridge or do we close it because it's not providing a lot of people for New Ulm and Northwestern? They decided to close Mobridge, and instead they bought a Jesuit school in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, and moved the New Ulm Prep School over there and called it Martin Luther Preparatory School. I know that Pastor Bodie is a graduate of Martin Luther Preparatory, MLPS. Anybody else attend MLPS? No. From 1979 to 1995 it existed. The nice buildings they already had there, a beautiful chapel. The chapel, however, didn't have an organ, but Kermit Moldenhauer and Eldon Hirsch went to Canada and brought back a pipe organ that they eventually installed. If you want to read more about that, I encourage you, buy the pictorial history book. 1990s or late 80s, there's again concerns about finances, among other things, and the decision was made in 1993 to amalgamate MLPS and Northwestern Prep onto the Watertown campus, and to amalgamate Northwestern College and DMLC onto the New Ulm campus. And so that was enacted or completed by 1995, and so then you have Luther Prep School in Watertown and Martin Luther College. We took away Luther's doctorate, and you have Martin Luther College in New Ulm. And so that's what you have today then, is our 4 prep schools, or our 2 prep schools and our seminary, and our college and our seminary. Our 3-tiered system, 4 schools. In the conclusion on your notes there, I have a quote from a hymn that says, they prized as jewels their Christian schools and left a lasting treasure. And And I think this is one of the, and granted, I'm biased. I work at one of them. I serve at the seminary. But I think that our ministerial education system is a jewel. It is a treasure that is envied by others. I don't think we often realize that. Last spring, we had an accreditation team that visited the seminary. So an outside agency coming in and looking at our school. They were floored at what we have. They saw our students. One lady came up to me, students having a fun time in the cafeteria and getting along so well, they're friends, they know each other, and she asked them, how do you guys know each other so well? And one of them said, well, some of us have been going to school together for like 10, 12 years. And that's just unheard of. But what it does for us, it provides consistent training. It provides a steady stream of people, of students. At the seminary, we have a very good idea for looking out 4 years, kind of what we're going to get at the seminary. And so just such a blessing. And the consistent training, consistent supply of workers. We know each other. That's a blessing when you get out into the ministry. You can work together, but also sometimes hold each other accountable a little bit. But you go back to the symposium. Somebody compared symposium was at the seminary last week. Somebody compared it to like homecoming. You get together, you hear a couple of papers, you see the game, and then you enjoy some fellowship time together too. And just having that camaraderie has been and the brotherhood has been a true blessing to our church body. And so now you know some of the history behind some of that. I don't know how much time I have for questions.
Yeah, that's probably right on time. So
we
got time for one or two questions or comments.
Can I make a quick public service announcement?
Yeah.
If you have not heard of this book, I'd encourage you to think about buying it. Pictorial history book that just got published. I am one of the authors, but I don't get royalties, so it's not self-serving in that way. But these books are available. I don't know if your church had made them available in the pre-sale or not, but NPH, $30 plus shipping and handling, I think it is. Also, if you're interested in supporting WELS history work, the WELS Historical Institute, I'd invite you to join. I'm the chairman of that too, but I'd invite you to join, $40 a year. And you can be part of the WELS Historical Institute. So that's my public service announcement, Pastor Bodie.
Very good. Any comments, questions? We got time for one or two. I wish we had more time to talk about Martin Luther Preparatory School.
I wish we did too.
Really great campus. Jessica Newman and I are graduates of it, but just not a great location for people coming in from all over the United States.
Yeah, and the weird thing was when we bought the campus, we did not have a WELS church there. So we started a WELS church, Grace Lutheran, and a school, because the professors have kids and they need to go to school somewhere. So we started a church and school at Prairie du Chien as well. It was the only campus that ever had a swimming pool.
Yes, yeah.
Indoor swimming pool.
And the grade school was in the basement or the first floor of the boys' dormitory for the high school.
Oh,
so
really? Okay.
We got to pass them on our way to class every day. Yeah. Let's give our thanks to Professor Otto tonight. Thank you for coming and sharing that fascinating history with us.
If anybody would like WELS 175 stickers, I'll put some out here on your way